Good evening yet again to everyone rocking it through the ranks of Street Fighter V. This is Rillian for 2_MK. This content will be rebroadcast from my personal channel to the main 2_MK channel of the team with my full permission. It is Friday, it is final round, and you should probably be watching that, but that's why we have this guidance segments on Fridays. Less participation and more archivable stuff that you can just check later. If you happen to be watching, however, sure, let's go. Today we are working on NecalliBot 2.0. NecalliBot 2.0 is basically a clone of BlankaBot, which was created when BlankaBot was being conceptualized before the character was actually out, and it turned out pretty good for the purpose. So what we're working on now is getting this into a form where we can actually release it and it's useful to people. NecalliBot's original form was primarily for learning to anti-air, and he's going to keep a lot of that capacity, just depending on the timings you put in, not as much. The 1.0 version of NecalliBot is basically for you learning when to try certain anti-airs and at what ranges. The 2.0 version, I want to expand on that and keep some of the things that you needed to understand from the matchup, but focus more on the spacing, the defensive spacing that Necalli is intended to teach you, while still making you have to deal with mostly anti-airs and randomness in that regard. He's a lot more defensive than the original, and has more than one way to go into the air. He also lacks a lot of the specific special moves that you were learning to punish or learning to respect before, but uses more V-skill stuff. And now that he has his new V-trigger, he also uses that. So let's try to deal with it from the perspective of I should be over here because this spacing is the one that lets me anti-air. Let's go back to anti-air from over here. And of course, basic punishes of this guidance stuff. But there you see, I didn't actually anti-air. He is intended to mostly spend his time doing this guidance, and then stuff like that. And the reason I've chosen Kolin specifically is because in her case, I need to learn when to do that and when to anti-air normally. Characters who have really good specific anti-airs against buttons don't always do so well when the opponent empty jumps. But if you just play him as pure defense, you can see it's not really that hard. You just block, punish some stuff, and try to get the punish to put him where you could actually anti-air something. Good for punishing, for practicing basic punishes. He doesn't even block after most of this stuff because it's not really necessary. By the time you've reached this point, you should have relatively good timing for just punishing those moves regardless. If you don't, it's really up to you to learn whether or not you've done it right. More so than for Necalli to specifically have the correct amount of time before he blocks, which is what NecalliBot 1 is about. But one of the more important things that happens with this bot is that he has different rise options, first of all. and he'll inch forward like that and hit buttons that will potentially give you stress. But most importantly, we use V-Trigger 1 here because V-Trigger 1 causes Necalli to go into the air, so you can't just respond to the fact that he left the ground, because it's actually a different move. Most importantly, he jumps much less often. And that is one of the more important parts of it. You can also make it so that he does less disc guidance if you want, and that's probably one of the first alterations I'll be trying to make to the bot. But above all, this guidance does serve a good purpose. It gives you a move that he can do from fairly far away that makes you feel like you really should just mostly defend. Because once you've gotten into that defensive mindset, this is where the mindset part of it comes in. Once you're in the defensive mindset, it's easier to keep blocking than it is to anti-air anything. And he won't punish you much for having just that defensive, constant mindset. That torrent of power that he does is not even actually effectively an overhead, as much as it was touted it was going to be one, or someone implied it was going to be one. It didn't actually turn out to be one. I can crouch block that without a problem. So I don't have any reason to stand up at all. Except when he actually jumps. One of the reasons why this bot's timing is important though, and why you are supposed to continually punish him. You can like vary your punishes and everything, but his general stuff will deal with it for you. Is that under most circumstances he will not in fact jump, but when he does jump, it's very likely to be after a particular move that looks like something else you should have been watching for, or right after he gets knocked down. And most of us don't think cleanly like that a lot of the time. We expect our opponent to be defensive on their wake up rather than to jump at us. And if they jump at us, we're generally not defending properly. The reason we generally aren't defending properly has to do with why the person jumps and what we think is a good idea for them to do. This bot could be therefore said to be about expectations. To force you to stop thinking about your opponent in terms of what they should do, and see how well you can get yourself prepared for everything they can do. Oh, he does have the super. Useful. The general idea is that your opponent shouldn't just jump when they've knocked you down. When you've knocked them down, actually. But why not? Why exactly is it a bad idea to just whiff a button in neutral and then jump? If your opponent really expects you to jump, if you're very jumpy, this is a terrible idea because you'll get anti-aired most of the time. Because they're defensively waiting for that. But if you can make them focus on the ground game, if you can make them think you're trying to play footsies and then just jump randomly out of nowhere, there's a high chance that they won't be ready for it. And this allows the bot to have a very simple game plan without actually even having to be particularly good at anything. By making his jumps as random as possible, you really test just how hard you can handle this anti-air business. Because you must focus on getting your punish. And the punish timing for many characters, if you're trying to do the proper full punish that you could do from this sort of move, you're waiting for them to get close to you so you can possibly even figure out whether or not you should be punishing in a particular way or not. This move also spaces itself very nicely depending on how far away from you Necalli is. So if you succeed at the punish once, as you can see, now he has the EX version, which sometimes is punishable one way and sometimes is not. How exactly we convert this into a proper point system, however, has not yet been decided. But the easiest way to do it would probably be to make it so that you can only get the point after successfully doing something else. And since he doesn't necessarily jump immediately on wake up, he can delay it. You being on guard for it is a little bit different, especially if you don't have an anti-air that is easy to do from crouch block. So you're basically just repeating. It's easy to grind execution this way, to understand your timing. But at the end of the day, your aim is to make sure that you hit him with some good anti-air at times like that. Especially if he happens to jump over your head. The reason this works so effectively is because the thing that causes him to jump can't really be distinguished from any other thing he does. The only way it won't work is if he's already in another animation. Which can happen, but a lot of his animations are very short. A lot of the bot things are also very short. So you end up getting jumped on at times when you could also have been suffering from something else. This is particularly effective on characters whose anti-airs are not very basic and easy to do, or whose punishes tend to put the opponent at weird spaces. So for Kolin, I could use a different punish, and then I would probably get myself entirely out of sync. Well, yet again. Having to repeat the same thing over and over can make you very twitchy when that thing is not your primary aim anymore. It is very easy to practice combos while focused on practicing the combo. It's not so easy to practice certain combos while your entire focus is supposed to be on something else. And since in this case you are in fact required to use multiple anti-airs, the situation gets even more complicated. You can grind quite a lot of your anti-air reactions based on this bot alone, where the only thing you really care about him doing properly is jumping. The rest of the stuff he does is mainly to just make sure that you can't bully him. He has other options. He lands on the opposite side of you and goes for that. But he won't do that all the time either. So if you just push him around, it's sort of useful, but not super useful. He also has this, so when he's input correctly, which is not particularly hard to do honestly, he breaks a lot of your focus in terms of where you think you should be. And will remind you exactly why you end up in trouble when people do this. So now, I'm going to give myself the second difficulty. It's not necessarily part of the point system proper, but it is still something important. Really simple combo. After this guidance, crouch medium punch into something. In this case, I'm not generally going to be finishing that because I want him to be further away, but it's a general thing. Where is that land? Okay. The difficulty you're facing is that you're supposed to also try to get as many different anti-airs in as possible. And you're somewhat going to need it because sometimes he attacks in one way and sometimes he attacks in an entirely different way. For example, if I tell myself I must parry those, my effectiveness goes down quite a lot because now I'm adding more things to my mental stack that I must deal with. And I can't just go, well, hey, he's in the air, let me use this one. Because your mind is focused on when and how to down back, which buttons you need to press when you are punishing, potentially even different punishes depending on your character. He's supposed to twitch because he has a twitch that isn't a tell. He twitches and the twitch doesn't mean anything. He could keep twitching. He could do an entirely different move. It's usually a charge move, but he could just jump. So if you tell yourself, for example, that you must Shoryuken that, but use a different punish altogether for something else he does, you can end up making yourself work rather hard. If your anti-air is a standing anti-air, then you end up stressed out about how far away from him you are, and since he again changes the spacing at which he jumps or the timing at which he jumps, your options are either to be ready to go back to a standing position on the motion of him going into the air, or risk changing your anti-air spacing to some amount you're not even sure of. Necalli is also useful for this because unlike Blanca, who could otherwise have been used for this, not only does he not really have charge moves that go up, he also has a lot of interesting buttons where his hurt box, and these are the buttons we're using here, he's not actually going to hit you with most of those jump-ins. His hurt box is actually moving away from you, so that you end up more often whiffing the jump-in. Or I should say whiffing your anti-air against his jump-in. If you do it too early, you get nothing. The final form of the bot is that you can actually also practice your air resets if you have air resets that come after your own anti-air. But for example, you see there, you can't be absolutely sure. You would have to use a knockdown that makes sure he is always at a range where you are in danger. Where you are in no danger and can always do your anti-airs. But this is actually a useful thing to learn as well. And because he does have quick rise, back roll, various timings, you can't be absolutely sure where he will end up either way unless your knockdown has only a specific way you can rise from it, which is generally not the case because you're not throwing him. Most combos that come off of this punish don't actually lead to that. If you have a command throw character and your choice when Necalli does this is the command throw, then that's a different matter, but I would assume that you would not use that against this bot because you'd learn a lot less. This is particularly useful when your character has variable combos that they need to use in many situations. For example there, after he back rolls, if he jumps immediately, then I know that I should not do a particular type of anti-air. When he's cornered, the situation also changes. You can also use this to test where exactly you try to put yourself on the screen after you're knocked down. Because it is an okay bot to use your meaties on as well, especially if they are supposed to be mixed up between throw and regular attacks. You can learn a lot by simply going for the throw every time. Because he will nearly never jump out of it, and he won't really rise with anything either. But he does hit some good footsie buttons, so if your meaties are off, you will notice really quickly. I have no meaties with Kolin because you're supposed to do this. But yes, you can really just hold down back for quite a while and notice how stuck you get into that once you've done it. So my mind is now focused on meaties, and once again I have missed the anti-air. It is good when you're doing this to think of as many different combos and other things with as many different required buttons as possible. Because the more different buttons you can make yourself hit while working on this, the harder it will be to do your anti-air correctly. And similarly, the harder it will be to do your combos if you will start to focus on the anti-airs. This bot is quite closer to a kata because it doesn't tend to do a lot of damage to you unless you force yourself to focus on both things at once. But let's look at a character who has even more technically trouble doing this, but still has functionally a parry.
base at night. Bison, Necalli.
And since we'll then be on a stage that is slightly easier to read, at that point I'll go through the inputs because we're at about that point of the stream. So let's go through the inputs briefly once and once again at the end. But input 1 is quite simple. Is a forward throw. You must first frame this, but if you happen to plink it, in the case of Necalli, if the kick is plinked first, it's fine. And then you just hold down back for a little while, hit medium punch, hold the medium punch, and that's it. You're building up enough charge that he will actually do this move. So you should at least make sure to do that. But beyond that, you're good. It can be fairly lenient. You don't necessarily care how much time he spends or whether or not the medium punch becomes visible or whatever. You're probably just fine as is. He's just going to do light disc guidance. Sometimes, depending on your timing flow, he will do medium. For example, if you did the light kick plink, he probably will do the medium. This has to do with the way negative edge works and some other little things, but because you don't really care which one he does that much, given that disc guidance has been normalized, it's a lenient input. You don't have to worry about it. Input 2, just like Blanca, really simple. It's literally just V skill, V trigger. And the timing is such that you're not really waiting, you're more so doing it as if it is a target combo. If you hit his medium kick into heavy kick and you'll get a target combo, that's basically the timing you want to do it on. This actually unlocks that target combo, but he doesn't really need it that much, and he's not going to use it as much as Blanca does, or for any real reason. It's just there because it happened to be a useful way to get both his V skill and his V trigger in, but due to the way the inputs work, you can prevent it from being predictable and constant. Because if you're holding the medium punch at the end of action 1, and it transitions into this one, he'll actually just do a medium kick, and usually a heavy kick follows it. So you're not really looking for anything too special in that input. It's just that the others help it to not constantly come out, and therefore hide certain things and other things, and make sure you don't have a bot that basically does that all the time. Action 3 is a little simpler. This is actually a triple punch, but you can't see the triple punch. So this is a first frame forward triple punch, and then hold down back a little bit. You're also holding the triple punch, which is why it doesn't reappear. That causes this nice little inch forward, but if it plays into itself, because you held the triple punch, he doesn't do anything. Holding the triple punch also means that if he goes from this into certain other moves, he again doesn't do anything. I'll demonstrate briefly by turning on action 2 and hoping that they interact well. Alright, his is the triple kick. My apologies. I was thinking triple punch because of Blanca. So it's reversed. He actually ends up just doing this stand medium punch, which is a nice button for him to just throw out. So he can entirely inch forward. Hopefully we'll see it a bit soon. And then just hit the medium punch. And you don't actually know what he's going to do after that medium punch either. He has some decent options as to what follows that medium punch. So there is no tell. There's no, this is absolutely going to happen now. That will happen, but that also combos it pretty well, so if you weren't guarding properly, then you're probably in danger. And if it hits, it works entirely differently. So yes, forward triple kick, hold down back until you probably have charge, hold the kick the whole time, and that's it. You can change one of your buttons so that it makes it easier to hold the kick. And really, it's not that big a deal for most people to input this once they're familiar with charge timings. Just be careful when you're trying to end the recording, because for some reason the game can seemingly be a little finicky about whether or not you were really holding the triple kick. But as it's not particularly hard input, you can just roll with it, fix it if you need to later. Since he doesn't have any forward moves with kick, unlike Blanca, it probably doesn't actually cause that much problems even if it isn't that good. It's just that he will end up not doing the inch forward and more so doing heavy kicks in neutral, which you probably may not want. But hey, if that's something that can help your character face Necalli, rather than having him inch forward and make you twitch, or if your just style of play leads to you having problems with people who stick out random buttons in neutral and you want to hit them whenever they do, it's a good option for you. You might not have to bother with the first frame part. So on to slot 4, which is a relatively difficult input to actually get done because of the high requirement of it. But again, with him, it's a little more lenient. What he's actually doing here is hitting a first frame V skill with up. And you don't really need to keep the charge the way you do sometimes with Blanca. It's not useful for Necalli at all. So he's literally just up forward plus V skill. And if you do it just right, he will never do anything, because if you do up forward plus a button, it basically becomes an empty jump. If you do it precisely right, since the button is taken up in your pre-jump frames, he never starts an animation for any attack. And this means that he's able to actually do an attack despite the fact that you press the button at the beginning of the jump. If I give him, for example, the same slot 3, depending on the timing, you can see here that he'll actually just jump. But because of the spacing with it, he actually ends up doing the medium punch. There is a specific timing of his jump, therefore, where he can, as you've just seen, do the heavy kick. Now, if you left him just alone like this, obviously this isn't very threatening or challenging. But the more actions you put together and the more often you hit him, the more likely it is that he's going to hit that up forward a little late, because you had to hold it at least a little bit in order to get him to actually jump. Therefore, the chances are he will be still on the ground at the V-skill moment, get up or finish the animation for another move, and be holding up forward at that moment. This also shifts the timing for the heavy kick, so you're not really aiming to make sure he can do the heavy kick in the way that I would just show you with the two of them together. Not when those are the only two things available, because he'll just jump, and normally you want him to jump a little later into that up forward, ending the animation a little bit later as well, and resulting in him hitting a different button. Action 5 is really simple as well. It's just a forward triple punch and a half circle back. You don't have to hold the triple punch either, as you can see here. It probably wouldn't hurt if you did, but it really isn't necessary. Why is this useful? Because it allows him to do his command grab. It also allows him to get a more powerful disc guidance. Yes, disc guidance is available. Command grab is available. Random punches and kicks in neutral, somewhat available. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to defend, I messed up that one, because occasionally he'll actually grab you. But that's all there is to that input. Another simple bot for training a much less simple thing than before. If you want to train him without his V-trigger on, you simply don't activate 2. I can't think of a specific reason why you would want to do this, but he doesn't lose enough from that you care. You're still trying to punish most of his stuff, and still dealing with all of his various shenanigans. You can try doing it because, after all, you don't necessarily want him to do the other aerial attack right away. Maybe you just want to get used to him jumping about. When you're dealing with a 6-frame punish, your timing has to be a little tighter, and knowing that your timing has to be tighter can take your focus off the rest of the stuff. So, our suggestion to you is actually practice your hardest regular combo. Anything that starts with a very nicely timed punish button, 6 or 7 frames. Well, not 7. 5 or 6 frames. That is supposed to go into some big full punish. If you want, you can even use the 7-frame one because it will often counter hit, given that he isn't actually intended to block right after that. But you will be blocked some of the time, which is up to you how you handle that. But definitely go for your decently difficult punish. In my case, really, the more complex the punish, the better for you. Even if you need to have your V-trigger meter on so that you could get V-cancels for stuff, this is good too. So for example, I would practice doing that. Which I don't do because I don't play Bison anymore, often enough for it to matter. So that puts me in the perfect situation of I have to do all this stuff that I have to keep track of a lot of things. How much meter I have, whether or not I'm in the state to do it in the first place, whether or not I should be trying a different move because of my meter being in the right place. All of these things become important. And my mind gets locked onto the combo, making sure I execute the combo. And that can make me entirely ignore any anti-air stuff. The harder the combo, the better it is for you in terms of your mental space and practice for this thing. This is the other reason why it would be useful. He actually has enough V reversal to make you miserable. You could even use it to practice your V reversal baits sometimes, just to see what happens when you don't actually get V reversal. But no, I'm basically not anti-airing anything. Because my mind is nowhere near there. And the harder the initial execution and the state that you must be in, for example for Bison, this requires that I actually pay some attention to where I am and prepare all sorts of little things in my head for how this combo works or doesn't work, or whether or not I have triggers. And because, as you can see, I can do it too early too. So my mind is quite heavily on all of the little nuances of the combo. And not one bit on whether or not he's going to jump it. If your character has a specifically difficult anti-air, this is also a problem. But it's to get yourself to ignore the fact you're already crouch blocking, you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. Is to learn to get yourself to watch your opponent, to know that you're safe unless they jump, and respond to them jumping because they jumped at that moment. So I know I'm safe already. I can watch the air in front of me instead. Because any move he does, I'm just going to block it, and then I will have time to switch from watching the air to executing my combo. And that part is functionally the hard part for many people. If you find it easy, just move to a harder combo. Because I can tell you that I can do this all day and anti-air him all day, as long as I'm not trying to do the trigger cancel into all of those things. Because it's easy to watch the air when my mind is not on those other things, and it's easy to get the combo when I'm not really trying an actual combo that I'm not familiar with. If I'm just hitting literal muscle memory, this, all day, I don't even have to think about that. That just happens on its own. I could mess up the timing, but the combo itself is unlikely to be dropped. If I get myself to do that correct, that's a different matter. And once again, miss the anti-air. So you get the general idea. But what if you have a character whose anti-air is itself work? Or if you're, for whatever reason, choosing to use their most powerful or most difficult anti-air. While Chun Li is not specifically a character who has particularly hard anti-airs in themselves, against Necalli a lot of them can whiff,
Chun Li.
and you're optimally supposed to use different ones in different situations. There's also ways to convert her anti-airs into much more damage if you are aware enough to do it. So she has a basic easy anti-air if Necalli is basically right in front of her. What if he's here? And you have to remember, oh wait, he's further away now. Of course, it's easier because that's actually a meaty setup. I'm supposed to dash in after that. What if I didn't want to? What if for some reason it was not in my best favor against a particular opponent to actually do that? Then he has the capacity to jump from fairly far away unless I walk forward into a spacing where it becomes easier to anti-air. And depending on the character, even that walking forward might be dangerous to me. And as you can see, that whiffs, and I show you the air throw would also have whiffs. Whereas if he's only here, it's easy to do pretty much anything I want. Anti-air stuff. There are certain characters who you can just jump on your own wake up because the spacing will be so off that they don't have any options to anti-air you. Except sweep, because some people will sweep. But anti-airs that may whiff entirely because you were in the wrong position are generally very dangerous to do in Street Fighter V. So as you can see there, we use the medium punch because it makes Necalli's hurt box move weirdly relative to most things and forces you to reevaluate just how good your anti-air really is if your opponent isn't exactly where you are expecting to be. Here I can anti-air. At different ranges, not so much. But not with that. This works though. And to the point where it even beats whatever reversal he had. She can do decently well against that with just back heavy kicks, but you have to be ready with the back heavy kick. And she has other anti-airs that you're supposed to use in other situations as well. If he's at throw range and happens to jump, different things happen. But as you can see there, if he's too far away, then I need the light kick because the heavy kick wins. And this is common for certain characters, that your anti-airs just require a lot more thinking than others. At that point, he's quite far away. Unless we were in the corner, in which case it changes entirely. Because here I have to use an entirely different anti-air. And if I move backward, I have to decide how far to move backward so that I can potentially anti-air if my opponent decides to jump out. Also, whether or not he back rolls changes a lot of things as well. It's a good way to get you to watch your opponent's knockdowns. Even if you're not doing it for movie purposes, spacing purposes matter a lot too. Now, obviously this is easier for me on Chun Li because I practiced this combo enough, and the other two variants as well, that maybe I would drop one, but I'm not thinking about it anymore. I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm dropping it. I'm just dropping it because, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Tired hands, just not being good enough yet, not being consistent enough yet. Any number of reasons why you're just dropping the combo. But you're not thinking about the combo. The combo is not taking up mental space at this time. It's just either happening or it isn't. If I made it more difficult for myself by making it so I have to V-cancel or something, then it changes entirely. But in this case, probably not, because the first part of the combo is about the same. So for a character that has a lot of different defenses for jump-ins, you have to do a lot more thinking about this. If your character has charge moves and certain things don't work as well because of it, you're in even worse trouble. Because for Chun Li I need to know like 6 different things, and I have to watch very carefully on the spacing to decide which of those 6 things to do. My meter matters for some of them. My general mindset matters for a lot of others. Some of them can't be done as a twitch reaction, that sort of thing. Depending on the character, you might have even more things you're supposed to do. Against Akuma, for example, I need to use this as an anti-air to certain things. It's not actually a terrible anti-air, it just has most use when you expect your opponent to try to fake you out. You just hit that instead of doing anything else. And there are many characters who have things like this. Fang, for example, is basically the same thing. Fang's medium punch is a really good anti-air if you think your opponent is trying to trick you and not actually do a jump-in attack. Or if you realize that their jump-in attack is intended to hit too deep and they're going to take too long. For Ryu, Crouch from Heavy Punch does this job very well. So I basically switched my mental state to, hey, let's use that to punish. And you may be caught off guard even more so by the fact that, depending on how far away Necalli is from you, that move becomes very, very slightly less minus. He might be able to get away. But the most important thing and the hardest part is to finish your combos when in this state, and when you don't finish them, when the combo drops for some reason, Necalli still has the capacity to jump. If your combo is blocked, or if Necalli does not get hit by the full combo and then does jump, can you anti-air him then? Because the pushback will change as well. To make this bot even harder, you generally leave in, if you happen to go to straight up on action 4, is it? Yeah. If you happen to go to straight up on action 4 toward any point, just leave it there. There's no reason why he must only have the 9 in the input, because having him occasionally neutral jump and fake you out in terms of your own reactions to him leaving the ground is even more useful. It quickly teaches you that you are not really reacting to your opponent being in the correct space, you're just reacting to their feet leaving the ground, which is a different matter. If you jump too early, he may jump and clip you himself. That, for example, was jump back medium punch. And that happens because I have played Chun Li enough to know that at that range, if I jump forward medium punch, I have a chance of getting hit by the opponent's rising move, or just whipping for some reason on certain characters. So I dropped my combo, or messed up something, and my opponent has jumped now. And I know that in order to anti-air them, I must jump backward instead of forward, or straight up. Like that. Combos, spacing, knockback, lots of little things affect this. That, for example, is a real meaningful anti-air. It's an option selecting one too, because you just do it as if it's EX, and if you fail, then you get the heavy one, which is safe to do as an anti-air for most people's moves from very far away. It's a good way to prevent yourself, on this character in particular, from getting tricked into trying to counter a safe jump with a normal anti-air. She normally still clips them. So there's that usefulness. There we go. That's the moment I'm speaking of. For some reason it's a little bit difficult to get it done when their hitbox is descending at a certain rate. She will not end up hitting them because of hers clipping over their head, but somehow if she does it backwards, I guess the trajectory of her own hitbox is different, blah blah. You should look out for this sort of thing on your own characters, because it can be very frustrating to have an anti-air you're sure is going to work and fail it, because once your opponent picks up on that, if they're really good, they will do all sorts of things to you. It's equally important to recognize when you just shouldn't respond at all. If you have a really good option for that response, but some characters really don't. Some characters just can't quickly deal with that situation where the opponent has done a jump from really far out that is not even intended to get anywhere near you. Wow, my mind is in a totally different state because I just went to do Kiko Show and I meant to do it with a super motion. Oh well. For example, understanding exactly how far away your opponent has to be before you can use Rankyako as an anti-air. And for Rankyako in particular, which follow-up you get to use based on the distance they were at. So this bot is a good way to quickly get a handle on a new character's anti-airs, or when you have one whose anti-airs are generally at least a little bit stressful, or you can get a lot more damage off certain anti-airs than others, to refine your anti-air styles and skills based on the character. The initial NecalliBot was basically to make sure you could anti-air at all, and figure out how to space yourself so that you know which anti-air you can use. Your idea being, stand here, this anti-air will work here. And the rest of the time, you could just block. It's perfectly acceptable to just not anti-air when you're not confident in it. Against most characters, you can manage to get out of the pressure without taking too much damage. So if it's just a trade-off of taking full jump-in damage by failing an anti-air, or getting pressured, if you're not in the corner, most of the time, you might as well just block if you're not confident in the anti-air. NecalliBot 2 is intended to make you as confident as possible with all your anti-airs. And with all of the spacings of your moves and what they cause your anti-airs to change to. If I'm token zoning and then walk forward, different things happen. If I end up walking away from a move and decide I want to try to play footsies and I feel things are going back to neutral, I need a different anti-air. With hers usually bat every time. So that works because I moved out of the range of most other things. But it doesn't work there. If I didn't move backwards, then I don't get the anti-air. Most of the time, that is dangerous. It doesn't seem that way here because Necalli will never do a button that will actually matter. But I know from experience that I shouldn't actually hit that button at that rate. And he quick rise. So if he quick rises and immediately jumps, I get one anti-air. If he back rolls, I get a different one. This is particularly useful for you defensive players who like to walk away from situations like this and go back to zoning or whatever. Necalli is a great character for this, unlike Blanca, because Necalli's disguidance, unless you're using the EX version of your projectile, will go through it. So if you can get rid of some of your constant zoning instincts by facing an opponent who spends most of their time approaching you by doing a projectile cancelling move, it can help you a lot with those habits. For instance, on Chun Li, for some reason, I don't remember why it came up. It was probably for, oh right, it was for Kolin. I can actually do Chun Li's back heavy punch as an anti-air, as if I am doing Kolin's counter, because they're the same thing, functionally. If I have the execution correct, since Chun Li's quarter circle back heavy punch doesn't do anything, I could easily get both my characters into the same anti-air feeling by doing the same motion on them both, even though for one of them it's a special and for the other is not. Fortunately for me, they use those anti-airs at similar spaces. For example, if Chun Li does this and the opponent goes over her head, there's a good chance that unless they were really confident in their cross-up, Kolin would just have not done anything either. If you play multiple characters, this is a good spot to use to see what sort of things you use as your anti-air autopilot. So just get into a state where you feel everything's going fine, you're perfectly confident, and then suddenly switch character on yourself. Or you can switch to an entirely unfamiliar character. So I don't really know how to play R.Mika very well. But I should be able to at least get myself to anti-air, right? That's the idea. And meanwhile, quote-unquote, learn her combos. But just moving to an unfamiliar character changes the exact same thing I was doing before. Because it's not really hard to hit anti-air buttons when I'm as aware of Necalli's spacing. It changes the entire feeling. Because I'm now focused on the combo, watching where he ends up after it. And feeling slightly nervous about a lot of things. If you ever wanted to test how good your actual core anti-air reactions are, this is a good way to do it. Just anti-air on a character who you don't know the real way to do this for. Unfamiliar combos, unfamiliar timings, an opponent who is reversing you or pushing you to weird spaces and not actually jumping. All those things combine pretty quickly to give you a situation that feels completely unfamiliar and therefore makes the basics hard. So I can do this combo easily now. It's fairly easy to switch in, even though I don't know what exactly I'm doing. My mind has found a button sequence pressing thing that does the combo with some mashing, and now the combo is working. If I try to change it, I'll probably drop it, because I'll slow myself down or something. But if I now go, okay, now I'm comfortable, because I've got my combo, does that now mean that I have my anti-air? Apparently not, because I need to understand how far away she has to stand in order to get certain anti-air. And since you don't always have time to reposition yourself against opponents like this, watching for their back rolls and similar is itself difficult. It would be optimal, for example, to anti-air with her R.Mika, but I'm probably not going to do that. You can treat this as the same as the other Necalli, where you are constantly trying to move to the correct spacing yourself after every knockdown. But it is in your better interest to think of it at least as a character you're not trying to move away from, and maybe even moving toward. One particularly good way to think about it is that you're trying to bait him to do some move on wake up. And the reason why that would never work otherwise is if your opponent just sees you literally get a knockdown and then walk away from them calmly. Unless they're expecting a shimmy, they're not going to hit anything serious. You're not going to get anything off of it. This isn't really relevant to the bot, but it's a good way to think about it. So moving along in the vein of various ways of looking at this opponent, let's switch up some stuff. First of all, some buttons. Ryu generally finds this easier than most because Ryu's target combo deals with Necalli really well. But what if you didn't have that option? What if you couldn't do Ryu's target combo against Necalli for some reason? Well, you just choose another combo, obviously. It's not that hard. There are lots of options. But rather than do that, we're going to go with the standard target combos thing and focus on getting the anti-air part. Just knock him down. All the standard combos are fair game here. But above all else, can you anti-air Necalli in all of this mess? And since you're spending most of your time expecting him to do this guidance, the question is, can you do that on reaction while still waiting to see if he does everything else? The idea being, this is what makes Shoto characters strong and isn't very easy to understand when you're first starting to play the game. Why it is that people are so talking about how these characters are so good at certain things. Anti-airs feel they're just anti-airs until you have to deal with this level of situation. For Ryu, he has a move that you basically go, as long as you are in anywhere in this relative space, and I manage to execute this move on practically any timing, I'm hitting you. It also helps a little bit that nearly every other move that you could accidentally do instead, case in point, is basically just as effective. But if I were to say now that you had to anti-air with his axe kick, which is quite possible, it's decent anti-air for a lot of things. Certainly against this Necalli's specific way of doing things. The spacing becomes different, the timing becomes different, the understanding of where to stand and where Ryu can be all change. And your focus suffers not only on the anti-air, but on every other part of the thing. You end up doing different combos, you end up repositioning yourself differently. You end up with your timing off. This is completely natural. This is just a thing that happens because fighting games are hard. Splitting your focus in multiple directions is difficult. And so by a stroke of both luck and, I guess, fate, we now have an advanced version of NecalliBot that can really point that out to you without you having to understand that well how to create the situation yourself. Because the other NecalliBot, you could have done most of this training. But it wouldn't have been hard to do it. It wouldn't have been forcing you to do it. 2.0 bot is intended to force you to do it. You can use this to basically see where exactly your flow goes wrong, when you can get crossed up, why your opponents are confusing sometimes. It's a very clean bot for letting you feel out when things have gone wrong and recognize those sorts of situations so that even when you're in matches you can realize, okay, I didn't do anything wrong there, my opponent hasn't gotten some new trick. I just flinched. I was not as calm as I could have been. I was not as ready as I could have been. And every now and again, as I said, since he has very few if any tells, you can get yourself to go, well, he did something, he whiffed a button or something, so that means he's probably going to jump. And that's good. You're supposed to have at least that level of it. Otherwise this would be close to impossible. And this is fine because in real matches it's the same thing. If your opponent is just whiffing buttons completely out of range and neutral, you can just not do anything about that because you don't have to care, unless you plan to whiff punish them. That is most likely the time they have for jumping. At least for jumping in the way that is dealt with by your standard anti-airs. If you want to practice against cross-ups, you have pattern 21 for that. Ken will handle that for you. But NecalliBot 2.0 is intended to do this. So, we're going to turn back on Action 2 finally, and get rid of all these awesome view reversals. But add back in the big problem. Yes, we're used to it. Yes, we have all these anti-airs and this spacing and this timing is everything. Everything's fine. Until Necalli gets one more way to go into the air. And then everything starts to fall apart. I really wish that combo used to work. Now again, it's perfectly fine for you to just block it. But at that point, has Necalli really lost out? Necalli probably got something he wanted by doing that move. But more importantly, he has something that makes him leave the ground and makes you want to anti-air in whatever way you were practicing your anti-airs all the rest of the time. And sometimes that anti-air is not going to serve you well for that situation at all. But that move is functionally anti-airable quite a lot. It's quite slow. The hardest version of the bot therefore is, don't block that move. If Necalli hits you with that 10 times, blocked or not, he wins. When you have reached the point where you can keep everything else on the stack and never have to block that move, backdashing is fine. But when you have never blocked that move, or very seldom blocked that move relative to everything else, then you can say you feel comfortable with your character, you feel comfortable with your character's anti-airs. And since you can do all this while practicing your regular combos, and regular responses, you're probably fine. So, obviously the bot will be up on our website, 2-mk.org. This weekend, almost certainly Sunday, around 6 Eastern. For those fans of our work who are not in the US, please remember that there have been some daylight savings time changes recently and it might be slightly different timing. But it'll definitely be out by Monday. If you joined us late and wanted to see the inputs and can't discern them from this because they're generally not that discernible, you can reference NecalliBot and do some reversing on 3 and 5, or you can just go to about the half-hour mark of the stream and I will have been showing them off then while playing Bison on Chad Blue Base. Easy to find. If you're watching on YouTube later, it should be some timestamps probably to let you know. If this is easy on your character, rather than basically thinking you don't need it, see if you can make it harder, be thankful that it's easy, those sorts of things. Once again, generally, our advice on how to make it harder is to use buttons that don't actually punish Necalli properly, and then hit confirm those buttons. Or just if you have some relatively hard alternate combos that you don't normally use, try using those instead. See if you can learn some spacings for them. Understand whether or not you can do them at all. All these little things can come in and help you. Just in case it wasn't clear, the gauges for the bot can be basically anything you prefer on your side, especially if you want to practice with more meter or your more complex combos to make it more difficult to force yourself to use those combos. Necalli should generally have regular V gauge, and it doesn't really matter what you set into gauge 2 because obviously until you defeat him or get defeated, it doesn't get reset. And if you don't want him to use his V trigger for some reason, you just turn off action 2. Nothing more required. So with that, I hope you have a good weekend, enjoy final round, take whatever inspiration you can from it to do whatever training you wish to do in this game, or any other fighting game you happen to be enjoying at this time. We'll be back next week as usual with all the same styles of content as always. Lounges for Monday, Street Fighter V, Tuesday, Guilty Gear, Thursday, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Wednesday, midweek content, which may eventually become something else given where we are in the training. You might see some DOA or some other things, whatever's hot that week, or just that we feel like playing. And next week, another disguisance of some kind. So good luck inputting your NecalliBot, and we'll see you next week. This is the Rillian for 2MK. Good night, everyone.